Good evening. I am Vallabh Sambamurthy, Dean of the Wisconsin School of Business. I want to welcome you to our first Badger Executive Talk. These are interesting times to be a leader. We've been rocked by the COVID-19 pandemic and all the disruptions that it has caused. And then more recently, we've been having intense conversations about the urgency of diversity and inclusion and how we as a society and educational institutions need to do more. Leaders matter because they help us navigate turbulence and uncertainty, even as they craft a deliberate vision for the future and inspire others. But how do leaders develop their skills and confidence? What can their experiences teach us, and how do they inspire us? At the Wisconsin School of Business, we're excited to launch Badger Executive Talks to explore these questions. This new series will help the Badger community learn from the journeys and experiences of Badgers who have succeeded and excelled in leadership positions. We will explore the journeys of these leaders through stories around key moments that shaped them, moments that worked out exactly as planned, moments that represented adversity and they had to improvise and learn, moments that provided unanticipated opportunities that they seized and adapted and grew. It is this combination of moments that provides a tapestry of their leadership journey, and they paint a picture of how these individuals develop their own North Star and the lessons they learn about the art of leadership. Our series, Badger Executive Talks, will bring to life these moments and journeys of accomplished Badger executives so that the rest of us in the Badger community can learn and develop confidence in our own journeys. As the pandemic forced us to adapt and move to a digital world, we realized the immense opportunity of connecting hundreds of Badger alums through these frequent digital forums. Over the next hour, I will moderate a conversation with our guest. You will have a chance to ask questions by typing them into the chat feature. Today, for our inaugural session, I'm delighted to welcome John Peirson, WSB alum and BBA graduate of 1988. John is the Chief Executive Officer of Deloitte Risk and Financial Advisory. He leads more than 15,000 professionals after a leadership journey of over 30 years. His story is one of resilience, and I know you are going to enjoy it.
Samba, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited and honored for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, John. I've gotten to know you over the past 1 year, and I know that many of our viewers today are looking at your impressive career trajectory and wondering about your path to this role. Can you provide us a high-level overview of your background and path to CEO?
Absolutely. So I graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a BBA in 1988. So before I graduated, I had the opportunity to interview, and I already knew I wanted to go work for what was then the Big Eight. Now it's the Big Four. But I interviewed with all the Big Eight firms, and I interviewed with all of them, and I got an offer from 7 out of the 8. Ironically, the one firm that I did not get an offer from was Deloitte. And now I'm actually with Deloitte. So I actually started my career as a staff accountant at Arthur Andersen in 1988. I worked at Andersen for 13 years in various roles within audit practice. I actually got promoted to an audit partner in September of 2001, 2001, which was 6 months prior to Andersen going into business in March of 2002. So in May of 2002, then I joined Deloitte in Minneapolis, and I actually joined Deloitte with about 90% of the audit and tax practice from the Minneapolis office in Deloitte. And I spent my first 3 years at Deloitte as an audit partner. I was a lead audit partner on the United Health Group audit. And then in 2005, the plan was I was going to rotate off for 2 years because of Sarbanes-Oxley. You had the 2 years off, and then I'd go back on and be the lead client service partner for United Health Group in 2007. When I rotated off in 2005, they asked if I would lead the Minneapolis ERS practice, which is Enterprise Risk Services practice, and do that for 2 years and groom someone to take on the leadership role when I went back on United Health Group. A lot of things transpired and things just didn't work out. And so I ended up not rolling back on United Health Group. And then they asked me if I would be the Midwest regional leader for the ERS practice. And I did that until 2009. And then from about 2010 until 2016, I held various leadership roles within our risk and financial advisory business within Deloitte. In the last 3 years, I was the chief operating officer for the risk and financial advisory business. Then I got an opportunity to become the deputy CFO at the overall firm level. So the Deloitte overall firm deputy CFO. I did that for 2 years, and I actually learned an extensive amount of information about the firm and just external things. And so it was a great learning experience. And then in 2018, I was asked to become the chief operating officer for our consulting business. And so I did that for a year. And then in 2019, I was asked to become the CEO of our risk and financial advisory business. And so that brings us up to today and where I am. So I've been extremely fortunate. I've worked in 3 out of our 4 businesses within Deloitte. The one that's left is tax, and I don't really have the tax background, but you never know.
It's fascinating, John, and I'm sure Deloitte could say that they were saving you for the future in a more visible opportunity while they let us train you.
It is funny, when I came to Deloitte, the partner who I interviewed with at Madison and didn't give me the offer, and I joined as a partner, he said, well, I guess I got that one wrong. So
at least he had the humility to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
So John, as you and I talked about leadership, often we look in the rearview mirror and feel like everything worked out as planned, but that's not how it is. Leadership is about a journey. So what I would like to do is unpack your 30-year career and reflect upon pivotal moments. What are the things that shaped you? What are the decisions that had intended and unintended consequences? What's the earliest moment that influenced your career?
So I would say it goes back to actually a really young age. I grew up in a small town in western Wisconsin, and my parents owned a small business. It was an appliance and electrical business in my hometown. And I will tell you that almost every dinner conversation that we would have at night, my parents would talk about the business, and they talk about various things. But the thing that probably stuck with me the most was that they repetitively said how critically important it was to earn and maintain the trust of their employees and their customers. And that would allow them to build goodwill and continue to have a successful business. And so that was a critical thing for me. It was just kind of a learning of like how critical customer service was. And I actually started working for my parents' business when I was about 14. And I worked there all the way through the summer of my junior year of college. And the last thing that I did for their business was I helped them develop the computer system and implement the computer system that allowed them to track their customers, their service records, and everything, so that, as my mom would say, they had a better handle on their most critical asset, which was their customers. And then another thing was my grandfather. So my grandfather was a plant manager for a canning company in my hometown. And I would, from about the time I was about 5 till I was probably about 10, I would ride with my grandpa almost every night of the week as he would travel around the county going to visit farmers to talk to them about when they should plant their crops so that he could then plan for the canning operations of when the crops would be coming in and being harvested. And my key takeaway from that was that it was interesting to see how they negotiated and went back and forth with different things, and how when it became successful was when they both realized that they had mutual dependencies. And if they figured out those mutual dependencies and figured out how to work through those, they'd have mutual success and mutual future. So those are probably the 2 critical things from early on.
What strikes me, John, is that you got a chance to practice going from operations to advisory in your parents' business before you did the real deal at Deloitte. It's like take 2.
Yeah.
So you obviously attended UW-Madison for your undergraduate career. In my 1 year here, I know that everybody has favorite moments about Madison. So what are some of your more memorable moments from your time in Madison?
Yeah, I have a lot of really great memories, and it's hard to kind of narrow it down to just one. I do think that one of the things I learned at a very early age was It was all about working hard and playing hard, right? It was have a great time, but you were still expected to do well in class, and you're still expected to show up for class. I love the football weekends. I still love the football weekends. But probably one of the biggest things that stuck with me, and I still remember it, was the first one-on-one conversation I ever had with an accounting professor, Jerry Wygant. And that was when I decided I wanted to be an accountant and I wanted to be a CPA, because as he explained it, was how critical accountants were. Accounting finance was the language of business, and how critical CPAs were to the financial and capital markets. And so that was one that really stuck with me. I think another memorable moment was getting accepted to the business school. That was a big deal. We got accepted after our sophomore year. So to actually have that achievement, that was one of the memorable things. And then I think for me, it was spending a lot of afternoons down on the Union Terrace and studying and making a lot of lifelong friends that you just met down on the terrace as you were relaxing and interacting with people. And so those are probably the biggest memories that stuck with me.
It's wonderful. In my time here, I've heard stories about Jerry Wygant and what a legend he was and how he inspired so many young minds.
He did.
And that's remarkable. There should be a song about the Union Terrace somewhere. If it's not, somebody should write it.
Somebody should write it. Other than me, I have no musical inclination whatsoever.
Very good. That makes it two of us.
Yeah.
So, John, when we were talking, I was fascinated to hear about your experience when you joined Arthur Andersen, which was formerly one of the big five firms, and you spent more than 13 years with the company. What were your experiences and how did they shape you?
Yeah, there were a lot of things that shaped me at Andersen. I think, there was, partially it was the culture that Andersen had, and, the term may not be appropriate today, but back then it was think straight and talk straight, right? And it was really about having a point of view, having the confidence to share that point of view, even if it might not be shared by others. And then it was really about execution. And so that was something was ingrained in me from the first day I went down to St. Charles all the way through the 13 years. But the other thing about Arthur Andersen was, and you have to remember, my 13-year career at Andersen was pre-Sarbanes-Oxley, because Sarbanes-Oxley came about because of the downfall of Andersen. But so prior to that, although I was in the audit practice, I had the opportunity to help my clients with a lot of things that were just beyond providing audit services. And so I did a lot of M&A due diligence. I did a lot of internal control assessments. I advised on governance matters. I did a lot of IPOs. I think I took a total of 6 different companies public over the course of my career at Andersen. And so all those experiences that were varied then shaped who I was as an individual. But I would tell you that probably the most important thing I took away from Andersen, the greatest experience I had from a leadership standpoint that actually shaped who I am, probably came as a result of the downfall of Arthur Andersen. And so when Andersen went out of business, and it happened very, very quickly. I mean, it transformed. I remember I just made equity partner, and I was on a golf outing with a number of partners the day that the verdict came down, and it transpired and went so quickly after that. But the biggest thing I took away from that was in a professional services business where it's a partnership, it became clearly evident who the true partners were. And the true partners were those that took it upon themselves to work together as a group to find the best solution that would employ the greatest number of Andersen professionals after Andersen went out of business. And then you had another group of partners who really acted like complete and total unencumbered free agents and went off on their own. And I can understand that. But I think what it meant for me of being a leader was that it's really not about you. It's really about the team that you have underneath you. And your responsibility, first and foremost, are those professionals that you lead. And so I will tell you that experience actually shapes how I make decisions today and influences how I make decisions today. And I constantly remind myself of that. So that's probably the biggest takeaway I had from Andersen.
Very fascinating. Sometimes we read stories of these companies, and it's not personal until you meet somebody who had a lessons learned. I've always felt that 2 important events in my lifetime: the rise and fall of Arthur Andersen, and of course later on Lehman Brothers. So interesting moments of adversity, which teach us a lot, and I'm certainly fascinated by your lessons. And now you come to the one company that decided to save you for future, Deloitte.
Yeah.
So at Deloitte in 2008, you take a leap of faith from audit to a leadership role with the risk and financial advisory area of the business. It's an area you told me you did not have much experience, but being the intrepid warrior that you are, that didn't stop you. So, what did you learn from that transition?
I would say the biggest things that I learned, and it was advice I had gotten from a mentor over the course of my career. And I think that's the other thing, that when I talk about these things in my career, I was fortunate to have a lot of really strong group of mentors that helped me along in my career. But, when I transitioned into ERS, and I had no experience in ERS, I had done internal control work, but the offerings that we had within our enterprise resources business, I had never provided those. I'd never really sold those. I'd primarily been in audit. But I think the biggest takeaways I had was I went into it and I was passionately inquisitive. I still am to this day. I kind of learned that from my parents growing up. But, I learned as much as I could, as fast as I could. I asked a lot of questions. I took a lot of advice from a lot of different people, tried to understand as many things as I could. And I think, the biggest takeaway I had was that I remember when I was asked about taking on that role, I was a little bit hesitant because I was like, well, wait a minute. And then they kind of said, well, it's only for 2 years. I'm like, oh, well, for 2 years. I mean, you can do almost anything for 2 years. But I think one of the things that was really important was that what I reminded myself of is, even though I might have lacked a complete confidence I could be successful in it, the thing I kept reminding myself was, look, they wouldn't have asked me to take this role if they didn't believe in me being successful in this role. And there's a vested interest in me being successful to show that they made the right choice. And so constantly reminding yourself of that and taking those chances. And then I think the biggest thing for me was I really tried to understand and work with the team that was coming in, because I didn't really know anybody in that group. I really tried to understand them as individuals and what made them successful and what was driving them forward in the future, so that when I led them and we had discussions, I kind of understood what those things were so I could actually lead them in the right way.
Wonderful. So, John, it's been interesting that there's an old Chinese curse which says, may you live in interesting times. And certainly it seems like the interesting times don't stop rolling. Even before the current challenges, we talked, and when I arrived here, there was a clear realization that the digital transformation or disruption is all around us, and it is challenging us in many ways. And so we have been talking about transition, disruption, change, which has only been magnified by the pandemic and the searing national consciousness about race relations and so on. So as you think about the present day challenges, how are you leading your organization through them? And then there are many young aspiring professionals, the future John Pearsons, listening to you, both within Deloitte and graduates of the Wisconsin School of Business. What would you say to them?
So I think that the biggest thing is the thing I start with first and foremost is this too shall pass. I think about my career, and as you said, it's been over 30 years. And in that 30-year career, I've experienced a lot of different things. And how they've impacted the business I work in, and they impact the clients that I work with. I go back to, I was actually deferred as an equity partner in 2000 as a result of Y2K, and didn't make equity partner that year. I made it the following year. And as I said before, I made it literally 6 months before Andersen went under. So I went through that with Y2K, and then we had 9/11. Which was right before Andersen went under and right before I joined Deloitte. And then we had the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. And so what I would say is that through all those experiences that I had, and I was in different roles and different stages of my career, it really comes down to navigating through it. And I think you have to deal with the crisis that's at hand, right? And so one of the things that we do within risk and financial advisory and within the firm, the framework we view, and we actually talk to our clients about, is when you have a crisis, you need to respond, you need to recover, and then you need to thrive. And so that's really how I've been trying to lead through this. And so the first part of this, when it first hit, it was all about responding. Like, how are we going to take our 15,000 employees and turn that into a virtual remote delivery system? And we actually did that very well. We were lucky, we were fortunate that most of our professionals they all have their own laptops, and they work remotely outside of our offices to begin with. And so that transition was okay. We also did a business continuity test a year ago that actually we found where some of our kinks were, and we were able to work through some of those that we had. But you know, in the current crisis, and so we had to go through the response to the crisis. And I think one of the things that was critical for me, and is one of the things I've always tried to follow in my leadership, is I think you have to come up with a set of guiding principles that you're going to leverage to guide you through it as you come into certain situations that are going to be new. If you can think about those beforehand, before you actually hit those different situations that you use to guide the decisions that you make, I think you're going to make sounder decisions that are right for the short term and also for the long term. I think the other thing that was critical to me was communicate often and communicate frequently and give updates to our professionals and get information from our clients as often as we can, so we have the best information to deal with to make decisions. And I think the other piece is just being as transparent as you possibly can, and being transparent that I don't have all the answers, that there's still things that we're still working through, that we have to wait to see what kind of happens with certain things. And I think being communicative and being transparent and sharing the information as you have it and giving updates on a regular basis as you move through the crisis, I think that's helpful. I think the other thing that's critical for us is the current crisis is creating a number of issues for us that we need to deal with. Our clients, every client is looking at it, and they've been impacted in different ways, and they're all looking at cutting back on their discretionary spending. And a lot of the things that we provide for them, some of the things we provide are more discretionary than others. And so you'll have a decline in your revenue, and how you respond to that is critical. And what I've tried to use as a lens, and it's one of the guiding principles, was we can't make any decisions in the short term that will jeopardize our long term. And so that's really one of the guiding principles that we've had. And I think the other thing is to look at this as an opportunity as much as it is a crisis that you have to deal with today. And I do think, as you referred to in the question, I think this is going to expedite how quickly our clients and how quickly we move to a digital environment. We move to automation, we move to other things. And I think that can be scary in some ways, but in other ways, I think it was something that was going to occur anyway. And I think this just expedites that process probably quicker than it was. I think about like telemedicine. Telemedicine was something that had been around for a long time. It really wasn't getting traction. And now all of a sudden we have this pandemic, and almost everything is telemedicine right now to a large extent. And so it's things like that create opportunities as much as they create the crisis as well. And so it's all about how do we thrive on the back end of this when we're done.
It is certainly interesting. I've often said that we are probably not going to return to the same normal. We are most likely going to reset the normal. And what will be interesting to see is what parts will we change forever. I look at restaurants, I look at services providers, airline travel. Much as those frequent flyer rewards seem attractive, it'll be interesting to see what's the new normal that we reset to. But John, as I hear your story, hindsight is always 2020. And in looking back at your career, is there anything you would do differently if you could go back in time and reverse your journey, much like Back to the Future?
Yep.
Any regrets? Any moments of pride?
Here's what I say. I don't have any major regrets where I would have done something totally differently. I think there were opportunities that I had over the course of my career, and when I think about it, I probably wouldn't have changed it. But earlier on in my career, probably in the late 90s, I was asked to move into our M&A business within Arthur Andersen. And that would have required a move. It would have been a move out to the West Coast, to San Francisco. I love San Francisco. And I think, my career would have turned out differently. So it's not really a regret, but it's almost like a what if. Like, what would have turned out differently had I done that? And so it's not really a regret, but there's instances like that happen. And I think the other thing that for me is that I think there was a few opportunities I turned down where I said no to certain things, and I did that really I only did that once. And I remember doing that once at Andersen, and I learned from that to really not to say no to opportunities, because they're growth opportunities. And I look at who did take that opportunity, and I saw what he was able to do with his career. And so, I think it's just a matter of making decisions, but I really don't have any regrets per se, but you do have what ifs, and you think about that. But I have to admit that I've been really fortunate. I've been blessed. I'm blessed to be where I am. And, a lot of it came from luck, but, some of it is just hard work. And I think that hard work is what I really learned at, UW, and I learned growing up with my parents. So
That's wonderful. What's that old saying? Success is 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration. What is luck? But so, John, we've had a fascinating conversation, what I call tapestry of your journey, leadership. As you reflect back on the moments and everything else in between, I'm curious to know, and I've learned your son, who chose to chart his own destiny by moving away from under dad's shadow in Minneapolis to crafting his own outpost in Seattle. So,
yeah, he's a UW grad too. A lot of the artwork on the back he made and designed. So
very
he's
good.
a Badger at heart, but he didn't ever really have to move out of my shadow per se, but he did move to Seattle.
I'm sure he will return.
I'm sure he will too. I hope he does.
What advice would you give to others based upon the journey of your leadership life?
So a couple things, and I think what it really boils down to for me, and I think it came through in some of the stories that I shared. For me, throughout my career, what I've really looked for are experiences. It's never really about the role or the title. Those things will come. I think it's really about, and I've said this to numerous professionals within Deloitte. I actually just said it today to a group of professionals I was on a Zoom call with. The only difference between me and any of those individuals on the call or any of our professionals within the firm is the experiences that I've had. We're all very smart. We're all very intelligent. We're all hardworking. We all went to universities. We all graduated. And so really the only thing that really separates us are the experiences that we've had. And so, I think back on my career, my career wasn't like a straight line trajectory. It wasn't like every opportunity I had, came out. I mean, go all the way back to the fact that, I didn't even get an offer to start at Deloitte. And now I'm one of the CEOs of one of our 4 businesses at Deloitte. So, I joke about this, and I'll show my age to some extent, but my career has really been a lot like chutes and ladders. If you think about it, I had a lot of things where, I went up. I had some places where I went down when Andersen went under. Then I had other places where I was just kind of going along steady. And I think that was the thing for me. I remember when I was the chief operating officer within Risk and Financial Advisory, and I had the opportunity to become the deputy CFO. And a lot of people said to me, well, why would you do that? That's kind of a lateral move. It's not really upward. And I said, the title might be lateral, but the experiences are vastly different than anything I've ever done. And I said, the purview that I'm going to get into the firm and all the inner workings of how the firm works, our external finances and things like that, it was really an invaluable experience that you can't get in any other role than you're in. And so, what I would say is don't hesitate on opportunities that might look like a lateral move, because it might be different experiences that you're going to get. And so I look at those, and I would take advantage of those when they do present themselves. And the other thing I would say is that I would say over the course of my career, I've learned a lot more from my setbacks than I have from my successes. I celebrate my successes when they happen, but I think if you truly take a step back and you look at the setbacks that you have, and you're all going to have them, there's no way around it that you're not going to have them. But I think you have to take and reflect on those and really think about what could you have done differently, what should you have done differently, or are there certain things that just happen and it's bad luck, just like you have good luck, and are there certain things that just aren't within your control? And so I would really say focusing your attention on those opportunities that you have and really learning from the setbacks that you have, and then celebrating those successes when you have them. I think the other thing for me is that, and I will tell you that some of the people that I've worked with closely the last 10 years that I've stayed pretty close with, one of the things I think that drives them a little bit crazy is that I never really rest on my laurels. Like it's all about continuous improvement. And so I would say that that's the other thing to really kind of stay focused on. Don't just accept the status quo for the status quo's sake. Always be thinking about how you can do something better tomorrow than you did today. And I think if you have that mantra and you're always kind of driving towards and trying to strive towards incremental improvement and continuous improvement, I think you'll be recognized as something that is how you're different from others. And I think that's really critical, because I think that's what's actually served me well. I think why I've gotten some of the opportunities I've gotten is that I typically challenge the status quo and say, well, why do we do this? And I think the other thing that to really remember is that when you go into a new role and you look at something and say, well, why do we do that? It's all about how you approach it as well. Because what I find is that I've transitioned these different roles and I'll see things, I'm like, well, why do we do it this way? Well, if you actually study and you go out and you find out that was probably put in place for something that happened 2 or 3 years ago, that it made perfect sense at the time that they did it, but they didn't continuously improve it and change with the times as things changed. And so that's the other thing to remember when you're in a role. Don't allow yourself to get into that status quo either and not change those things, and always be constantly trying to challenge yourself to do things differently. And then the other thing is, and it's critically important now, and it's been critically important to me for a long time, but just in today's setting and environment,
So, John, it looks like we probably have a momentary glitch. Uh, and it looks like one of the things that I heard you often talk about is, and I sense this myself, is that I talk about it, the imposter syndrome. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself in a status quo. There are some who do the same thing again and again and again. And what I sense from your journey is you've often thrown yourself into a new situation as an imposter. And that's can be very daunting and that can be scary. But clearly, as your life journey has shown, it can also be very rewarding because in these times, we certainly want to, many of us, and certainly that seems to you, you enjoy and thrive putting yourself into an unfamiliar terrain frequently. And so it seems that that's truly remarkable and an enriching journey of your leadership transformation. So, John, one of the things that you said that to me that I found, I wrote it down, is you said experiences outweigh titles. And that's interesting because very often people make the mistake of chasing titles. And experiences, to me, reflect an inner centeredness where your focus is upon enjoying the moment, taking risk, and growing. And you said you took the role of the deputy CFO. It was a lateral move, but it didn't go for the title. So I want to ask you a question on that regard. There are two different schools of thought. One is you advance your career by frequently changing roles and organizations. So what we call the hoppers. And there are others who believe in longevity and long stints. You have certainly had two long stints at two organizations. What's your perspective as you have met others about, is there the best way to advance, or how do you choose which way to go?
You know, here's what I'd say. I don't know that there's a best way to do it. I think it comes down to the individual and what the individual is really trying to aspire to. And for me, you know, I can tell you that, and people have asked me this, would you ever have thought, someone could ask me this 5 years ago, someone could ask me this 10 years ago, that I would ever be the chief executive officer of Risk and Financial Advisory, or the chief executive officer of anything for that matter? And I would honestly say no. And so as I thought about my career, and people would always say, do you do career planning? Do you have the next 5 years planned out in those things? And I never really planned it out in terms of titles, because I can honestly say when I started at Andersen, I didn't think I was going to stay to be a partner at Andersen. I thought I would stay for 2 or 3 years, get my CPA license, and leave to go to industry. And so what I think it really comes down to for an individual is to be thinking about, what do they want their career legacy to be? And is their career legacy going to be based on titles and roles, or is it going to be on the legacy of the followership that you've created throughout your entire career? And for me, it's always been about followership and about the teams, because I can honestly tell you that I wouldn't actually be sitting in this seat today if not but for the teams that I've worked with over the course of my career. And I can think back, and you can see there's a picture on the wall back there that is a picture of an eagle, you know, sitting up by himself. And it was a gift that was actually given to me by the United Health Group engagement team. And I rolled off the engagement after, I think I've been on for 14 years. And when I rolled off the engagement, they gave that to me. And it was really, that was probably one of the best things I ever got. Was I knew how important that team was to me and to my success. And so it's not only the experiences that you have, but it's also the teams that you work with and the teams that you form if you become a leader, and how you then leverage those. And the mutual success of the team is far more important than the success of any one individual. And I look back at that team that I worked with on United Health Group, and I think there's 4 people who are partners at Deloitte from working with me on that team. There's one that's the chief accounting officer for United Health Group. And so it's all about the team you create and the legacy you create through that to me was more important for my career than titles or roles that I have. But I do think that the other piece to that question that I think is important is there's something to be said about changing roles and moving opportunities, because it does give you different experiences. So I think if you're thinking about in terms of you're trying to gain the experiences that come with those roles, that's a great thing. But if you're just chasing roles and titles, that may not serve you the greatest in the long term, because you may not get the experiences that you need. The other thing about roles too is that, someone used to say this to me all the time, was that, when you're in a role, the first year is kind of you're learning, it's new, and you're trying to just learn. Then that second year, you're starting to really kind of understand, you're starting to really get in your groove. And then by the third year, you're probably close to mastering it. And so some people would say you should change roles maybe every 3 years, because once you're a master at something, are you really learning anything? And I think that's the other critical part, is it's really about continuously learning and continuously improving for me.
That's wonderful, John. We've had such a fascinating conversation. And so let's turn to the audience, people who are in this chat, and see what questions you have. And again, to the members in the audience, please type your questions in the chat so that I can ask John. So John, here is the first question for you. Looks like a Deloitte question. What's the future of office space for Deloitte in the future based upon the work from home reality? The economics must be substantial. Will there always be a physical office space for most offices?
So it's one of the things we're grappling with right now. We're having a lot of conversations. We're actually having a lot of conversations with our clients because we have a real estate consulting business. I think for Deloitte specifically, as we look at it, what the pandemic has proven to us is that we can work 100% remotely and 100% virtually. But is that the right thing for the long term? And what I would say is that I think we're always going to have an office presence, because I think that's critical from a community standpoint. But probably the size of the footprint that we have is probably going to be scaled back. And I think the other thing that we're going to have to do is, until we get a vaccine, I think how we utilize our existing office space is going to be drastically different than we've done before. We really moved to wide open office spaces where it was free flowing. You could sit next to each other and you could have open office spaces. It wasn't cubicles. And I think that's really going to be hard to do until we actually get a vaccine. But I would say over the long term, I would expect that we will likely reduce our footprint. But one of the things that's interesting with the virtual environment, and one of the things that as we were navigating through this and moving to virtual, is being empathetic to not everyone has the same situation. I mean, Samba, you and I are sitting in our home offices. Yeah. Well, the vast majority of our professionals don't have home offices, and there's an awful lot of them who are sharing an apartment with someone else who's a professional, and it's a small apartment, and how do they actually work through that? Then you've got others that have children, and they're homeschooling their children while also trying to do their job. And so I think it's just one of those things we're going to have to continue to navigate through. But I think in the long run, we won't have the same size of scale of office space that we have today.
Actually, that's a fascinating point, because sometimes we tend to think about a secular trend, work from home, also good about it, or work from the office. But hopefully what we are learning is that these lessons teach us an opportunity that it's not one size fits all, but what works best for others. We're learning similar students in our student learning experiences. I have another question for you, John. What are the biggest challenges professional firms are facing post-COVID-19? Please talk about clients' ability to spend, staffing of professionals, and delivery of services, virtual versus physical. Quite a broad list of topics.
Yeah, and so it's interesting when you look at it from a professional services firm. And so I'm going to give you an overview as Deloitte in totality, right? And I think that's one of the views that we have as Deloitte. We have 4 businesses. And so we have an audit business, we have a tax business, we have risk and financial advisor, we have consulting. The audit and tax businesses are relatively resilient in this environment. You need to have audits, you need to do your taxes and all those different things. And then you have the risk and financial advisory business, where there are certain parts of our business that are highly resilient, and then there's other parts that aren't. So if you think about, we do a lot of IT audit work, we do a lot of internal audit work, we do a lot of our cyber practices within there, and so those are a little bit more resilient from the standpoint of the issues and challenges that our clients face probably aren't as discretionary. They need to address those when they have those. You need to have cyber protection. You need to do and have internal audit. And so there's parts of our business that are resilient, and there's other parts that are a little bit more discretionary. And that's really what is, as we try to navigate through this and really try to understand in trying to help our clients work through their biggest issues and the biggest challenges they have in this environment. And what we're finding is we've done an awful lot of things in this virtual environment for the last 90 days. But there's certain things that you just can't do in a virtual environment. So when we're doing like M&A transactions, you really want to look the buyer in the eyes and have a conversation with them as you're doing due diligence. You're trying to figure that out. And so we're starting to open up more. We're starting to have more face-to-face with clients. But there's other clients that I think for an extended period of time, they're not going to want any external third parties in their buildings until there's a vaccine. And so that creates another challenge for us from the standpoint of how do you continue to serve your clients and continue to identify those new issues and new challenges that you can help them solve in the future. And so that's one of the things that's probably the hardest part of my role right now is all of that uncertainty. I can't predict the future. I can take in as much information as I can and as much facts as I can and use that to make decisions. But I know that level of uncertainty creates a lot of anxiety for myself. And I know it creates anxiety for our professionals as well about what the future is. But I do truly believe that the services that we provide within the risk and financial advisory business, and if I think about our purpose, which is to help create a more trustworthy, resilient, and secure future in society, I think when you think about it in those terms, I think the opportunities that we will have as a risk and financial advisory business will be even greater than it was when we went into the pandemic. But the thing for us is how do we navigate through the pandemic and come out and thrive on the other side? And so that's one of the hardest parts for us right now is just that uncertainty, because I really don't know how to predict ultimately what's going to happen, but I know in the short term what the impacts are going to be. And I think that's what I said earlier is it's really about making the best decisions you possibly can to navigate through the short term that don't impede your long term.
Right. And it's also challenging, I would imagine, because a lot of it is also your own clients' confidence about their business and their confidence about them. And it is, earlier you said your trajectory was not linear. We are in a time where any decisions could not be assuming a linear, all these conversations about restarting the economy. It would be nice if we had this rocketed V-shaped recovery. That's what we'd want, but it's such a unpredictable environment. So before the next question, John, in the past few years, there have been conversations about inequality, digital divide, the 1%ers, and so on. And those have been further accelerated in the past couple of weeks. So the question for you is, to the extent that you had a chance to think about it, what do you see the future of stakeholder capitalism in light of both the COVID crisis and the increased focus on what are businesses doing to address diversity, inclusion, racial inequality, and all of the things which are increasingly being thrust into the national conversation, and quite a few business leaders are beginning to think about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting from the standpoint of, when the pandemic hit, right, and we started to see what was happening, we started to see what's happening with unemployment, and I followed it at the national level, and I followed it at the regional level, and I followed it within Minnesota, which is where I live. And what's interesting was it became pretty clear pretty quickly that the impact from the pandemic was more impactful to the underrepresented minorities than it was to the whites. And so that was one of the things that you saw right away that was happening. And then I think what happened with the murder of George Floyd within Minneapolis created another level of unrest that was only going to, and I think partially that unrest, I think it's it's so unfortunate that happened, but I think it was the wake up moment. It was the catalyst moment that we needed to really have a wake up call to everyone else that this isn't right. This can't continue. I think when you think about it from the future of stakeholder capitalism, I think it's going to be really hard to unwind that. It's existed forever. But I think what we have to do, and I think what Deloitte as a firm is looking at, is how do we unwind and not stand for the institutional injustices that have existed and the racism that has existed, and how do we come across and how do we do something drastically different than we've done before? Earlier this afternoon, I spent 90 minutes with the Black professionals within our risk and financial advisory business. And it was really talking about and hearing their concerns, but also talking about solutions of what we can do differently as a business internally within Deloitte. But more importantly, what can we be doing differently within society to help change the trajectory that we're on and actually expedite that and do as many things as we can in the short term and also in the long term to change where we currently are. But diversity and inclusion is something that is critically important to me. And when I think about diversity, it's not just diversity in race, it's diversity in thought, and it's diversity in experience, and all those things you bring together. But really, if you really take a step back and think about it, the diversity of thought and the diversity of experience comes from differences in race. I mean, if that's one of the biggest takeaways I've had from the current situation we've had over the last 3 weeks is having a greater appreciation for the experiences that a Black professional goes through versus a white professional within our firm and even outside our firm. And I think that's something that we have to really be open about, having those uncomfortable conversations around and really start to change the way we behave and how we interact as it relates to that, and really start to take a stance on it that it's not right. We need to do something differently going forward.
So John, I'm very delighted that you're also a member of our external advisory board, and we have just begun conversations about education and preparing future business professionals. In light of what you have been talking about, any thoughts on what we should be doing as a business school in preparing the future John Pearsons, the young professionals, to be more well-rounded into this world where we need to unpack, unwind our existing thinking?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of things I think that the School of Business has done already. And I think if you stand back and think about it, like when I went to school, I initially started off in engineering. Like I thought I was going to be an engineer. I liked math. I thought it was great. And then I got into differential equations and I said, wait a minute, this is a little bit too theoretical for me. I need to go back to something that's a little more concrete. But I think one of the advantages is that, and if you just go back to the Wisconsin idea, right? I think that's what's critically important. I think really embracing that and embedding that into everything that we do within the business school, I think is really going to help with that. Because I think if you take a step back, it's about the experiences you have in college. And I will tell you that some of the best experiences I had at the University of Wisconsin didn't necessarily happen within the classroom. And it was really about the things that happen outside the classroom of how you grow and appreciate and understand the diversity and the size of the school. For me, I came from a small town. My hometown had 4,307 people in it. I think for the business school, I think it's really going to come down to the curriculum that we choose to have for the graduates. And I think, we major in certain things, and accounting are different things. I think the core curriculum of what we expect from a University of Wisconsin business school graduate probably needs to be a little bit broader and not as specialized into their one field. And so I think the things we've done around leadership, I think, are great. I think the things we can do around diversity of thought, and then around analytics. I think digital and analytics are going to be critically important in the business environment going forward. And so I think involving those and getting those more embedded within the curriculum, which you've talked about, I know are part of the plans, is going to be extremely important for the future graduates.
So John, you'll be pleased to hear the next question from a name you might recognize, Barry Salzberg, former Deloitte CEO and global CEO.
I do recognize Barry's name, actually.
Yes, yeah. Glad that you're on, Barry. And the question from Barry for you, John, is, John, you've benefited from mentoring. What are you doing to create a culture of mentorship in your practice from the ground up?
So it's one of the things that, and it's interesting, I've been a part of this business, as I said earlier, since 2008, 2009. And Barry's right. I benefited significantly from the mentorship that I had. And I think one of the things that, from a mentorship standpoint, it's a part of the culture. And one of the things that I've been talking about and trying to frame up is, creating a sense of culture within the risk and financial advisory business that is high performing. And what comes along with a high performing culture is it's the apprenticeship model. And I think you have to think about it from the standpoint of, if I think about my career, I've had mentors who were partners, but some of the better mentors that I probably had that probably had a greater impact on my career were people who were managers and people who were senior managers as I was going through my career, and how they mentored me, and then I grew with them. And some of them stayed within the profession, some of them left the profession. And so one of the things that we're really trying to do is trying to create that mentorship and sponsorship. And one of the things that we've tried different things within the risk and financial advisory business, and some have worked better than others. I think it's one of those things that's just going to have to be a conscious choice around really identifying and stressing how important it is for our professionals to actually be mentors to the younger professionals, and even mentors to your peers. I would view that some of the people who are my peers within the firm, that are partners within the firm, that I still view them as mentors even to this day, even as I'm the CEO of our risk and financial advisory business.
It's wonderful. So, John, one of our aspirations is to enhance our Badger success in consulting. So the next question for you is, what advice would you have for students or recent grads who aspire for a career in consulting, particularly in a post-COVID world?
Yeah. So, I think one of the things is that, and this is what's really hard, and I think it's one of the things that weighs on me the most. And I remember I graduated in 1988, and there were graduates in 1987 when the financial crisis hit, and the financial market crash in 1987. I would tell you that it's going to probably be a little bit turbulent times for the next 12 to 18 months, but I would say stick with it. Continue to look for opportunities. If you need to, continue your education. But I will tell you that this too shall pass, and that I'm confident that as we continue to move along, we'll have opportunities, and I'm confident we'll get back to growing the marketplace. And so I would just look for opportunities that might not be exactly what you were looking for, but again, do anything you can that'll gain that experience, so that experience continues to resonate in the marketplace. And I think I recognize it's gonna be tough in this environment, but stick with it. And I will tell you that from our perspective, one of the things that we're thinking about is that, and this was something that was really critically important to me, having been through previous crises within the firm, is that our future is dependent upon the undergrads, those new starts that come into the firm every year. And even though we're going through this, we're in difficult times, we're honoring all of the offers that we had out to those that were graduating this year. And we'll continue to honor those, and we'll be back on campus recruiting again next fall, because we know we're going to come through this. And when you come through it, we need to have that fresh thinking that comes in, and the new undergrads that come in. And so we'll continue to do that. And so I think be a little bit patient, but I'd also be confident that it is going to come back.
John, as a dean, I'm really grateful and very appreciative of firms such as Deloitte, which have honored that commitment to these young professionals who really are at the starting point for an exciting career. So I know that talent is hard to find, and maintaining that investment is a bedrock for a lifelong relationship. Our next question for you, and what long-term effects do you think the pandemic will have on firms' financial risk management practices? Should firms in the financial services industry pay more attention to certain types of risk? Clearly, very knowledgeable question from somebody in the industry.
So within financial services, it's interesting, right? I think that there's this pandemic has affected them differently than it's affected other organizations. I think that the biggest thing for them right now is kind of navigating through the credit risk that they have that exists, because if you look at, there's certain businesses in the pandemic and we've already seen it, there's a number of organizations that have declared bankruptcy and other things. And I think it's really about how they're going to leverage the capital that they have, and how are they going to deploy that capital towards the future that's going to have the returns that they desire in the future, while looking at their current portfolio and determining how they're going to navigate through the crisis that they have now with some of their credit, with some of the clients that they have that are probably at a significant credit risk. And I think it's all going to be for them about how do they maintain their capital ratios and satisfy the regulators as they navigate through that. I think they went into this crisis in significantly better shape because of all the regulations that came about from the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. But I think it's going to really depend upon, for their long-term future success, how they navigate through the next cycle as they go through and think about where they're going to extend credit. And I think that's one of the things that is interesting. You look at it from the standpoint of all the money that the Fed funneled into the economy to try to keep the economy up, and the capital and what they allowed the banks to do, yet the banks still didn't extend the credits that they probably could have. And I think that's had some effect on like how we're being impacted. And I think that's just decisions they made around a risk decision for their long-term viability, which, I can understand, appreciate why they're probably doing that.
So John, as I hear your story, I think about your leadership journey. It's got grit, it's got resilience, it's got never be afraid to take a chance. So there is a future book, John Pearson's Art of the Leadership. What's the punchline of that book going to be?
Resilient leadership, probably.
Right. And I'll still say, seek experience, not the titles. So
yeah. That's one that is has been critically important to me, and I think it served me well. And I'm confident when my career ends, I'll be satisfied with the experiences I've had, for sure.
And there's a lot to be satisfied about. So John, I want to thank you very much for joining this evening and sharing your experiences very candidly and revealing things that worked out exactly as planned, and revealing the low moments and what you learned from them, and revealing to us about John, the risk taker who wasn't afraid to go as an imposter into new terrain. So thank you very much. And I'm sure that we have learned a lot from this evening.
Thank you very much. It was an honor to be here, and I'm so glad that I was able to participate.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So as we conclude our inaugural episode of Badger Executive Talk, I hope that everybody out there enjoyed listening to Tom's candid revelations about his leadership journey. And it gives you, everyone, a chance to reflect upon your own journey so far and be confident that the road ahead might be uncertain, long, winding, murky, but it's the journey that matters, not the specific outcomes, because as John said, this too shall pass. As we wrap up, I want to invite you to join the next Badger Executive Talk on August 26th. Our next speaker is Tom Westrick, another proud and successful alum. He is the Chief Quality Officer at GE Healthcare. And as you end this evening, I request you to complete the survey by clicking on the link in the chat. Good night, and on Wisconsin.